Hey there. Tonight we're stepping into a different kind of history. Not the battles you know from textbooks, not the heroes carved in marble, but something older and stranger. A story about commitment so absolute it can only be measured in ash and smoke. About men who stood on foreign shores and destroyed the very thing that brought them there, not out of madness, but out of certainty. Or perhaps something that looked like certainty from a distance. If this kind of slow, atmospheric history helps you drift off, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it brings you genuine peace. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. There's something oddly comforting about knowing others are out there, falling asleep to the same quiet stories of ancient choices and their consequences. So settle in, dim whatever lights still burn. Let the past wash over you like a tide. And let's begin with fire and ships and the strange mathematics of commitment. There's a phrase that echoes through history in different languages, different contexts, but always with the same essential meaning. If you're so certain, burn all the boats. In Portuguese, se tens tanta certeza, quime deduz os barcos. The image is visceral, immediate. Flames licking up wooden hulls, sails collapsing in sparks, the acrid smell of burning tar and rope. And behind it all, a group of men watching their only path home turn to cinder and ash. It's the ultimate test of conviction, the final proof that you mean what you say. Because once the boats are burning, there's no quiet retreat in the night. No slipping away when things get difficult. There's only forward, only through, only the grim certainty that you will succeed or you will not survive to regret the attempt. But where does this image come from? And more importantly, what does it tell us about the medieval mind, about Viking warriors, about the nature of commitment itself? The conquistador's choice. The story most often told begins not in the cold waters of Scandinavia, but in the warm shallows of the New World. The year is 1519. The place is the coast of what would become Mexico. And the man is Hernan Cortes, a Spanish conquistador whose name would become synonymous with conquest and, eventually, with this act of dramatic finality. Cortes had sailed from Cuba with 11 ships, just over 500 soldiers, about 100 sailors, and 16 horses. Not a massive force by any measure, especially when measured against what lay ahead. He was defying orders, acting on his own authority, chasing glory and gold in equal measure. The governor who had sent him, Diego Velázquez, was already regretting the decision and would soon try to recall him. But Cortes had already made his choice. The journey from Cuba had already tested the expedition. Storms battered the fleet, forcing constant repairs. The ships leaked continuously, requiring crews to bail water day and night. Supplies ran low faster than anticipated. By the time they reached the Yucatan coast, several men had already died from illness and accidents. The fleet was battered, the men exhausted, and they hadn't even begun the conquest. Cortes made several stops along the coast before his final landing at Veracruz. At Cozumel, he encountered indigenous populations and gathered intelligence. He rescued 2 Spaniards who had been shipwrecked years earlier and had learned the local languages, skills that would prove invaluable. One of these men, Geronimo de Aguilar, became a crucial translator. The other had gone native completely, married a local woman, and refused to return to Spanish service. These encounters gave Cortes his first real understanding of what he was facing. The Aztec Empire wasn't a loose collection of tribes. It was a sophisticated civilization with millions of subjects, advanced agriculture, impressive architecture, and a military tradition that had subjugated the entire region. The empire's capital, Tenochtitlan, was built on an island in the middle of a lake, connected to the mainland by causeways that could be destroyed to isolate attackers. It was a city of perhaps 200,000 people, larger than any city in Spain at the time. The more Cortes learned, the more impossible his task seemed. His 500 soldiers would be facing an empire of millions. His 16 horses, while impressive to people who had never seen such animals, were hardly enough to turn the tide of battle. His gunpowder and cannons gave him some advantage, but ammunition was limited and couldn't be replaced this far from Spain. When he finally landed at what is now Veracruz, he faced a simple problem. His men were afraid, and rightfully so. They had heard the stories. They had seen the evidence of Aztec power in the tributes demanded from coastal communities. They understood the mathematics of their situation, and the mathematics were terrifying. More importantly, the ships represented safety. They represented the option to leave, to sail back to Cuba, to report that the mission was impossible, to live another day. As long as those ships bobbed in the harbor, swaying gently with the tide, retreat was possible. And possibility is a dangerous thing when you're trying to inspire absolute commitment. Some of the men began to whisper. They talked about the wealth they'd already gathered from coastal trading. Maybe that was enough. Maybe they should take what they had and return home before they all died in some futile assault on an impregnable city. The whispers grew louder. Cortes could feel the cohesion of his force beginning to crack. He needed to act decisively. He needed something dramatic that would unite his men, eliminate their divisions, force them to commit fully to the conquest. He needed to remove the possibility of retreat from their minds entirely. So Cortes, according to legend, gave an order that would echo through the centuries. He ordered the ships destroyed, not burned, exactly, though that's how the story is often told and how it's become embedded in our collective memory. The historical record, based on accounts by Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who was there, suggests he had them scuttled, stripped for parts, and sunk. The usable materials, sails, ropes, cannons were salvaged first. Then the hulls were deliberately holed and allowed to sink in the shallow waters. Less dramatic visually than a wall of flames consuming a fleet, perhaps, but just as final. And in some ways more calculated. Cortes told his men the ships were no longer seaworthy, that they were taking on too much water, that maintaining them would require manpower they needed for the conquest. He framed it as a practical decision, not a dramatic gesture, which may have made it easier for his men to accept. But the message was unmistakable. There was no going back. Victory or death, conquest or oblivion. Every man standing on that beach now had exactly one choice: move forward into the unknown or die trying. The psychological impact was immediate. Some men despaired. A few tried to resist. Cortes executed the ringleaders of a plot to steal a remaining ship and sail back to Cuba. But most of the soldiers, faced with the reality of their situation, hardened their resolve. If there was no escape, then conquest was the only option. Dying in battle started to seem preferable to starving on a hostile coast with no way home. And somehow, impossibly, it worked. Not immediately. The conquest took 2 years of brutal warfare, clever diplomacy, and incredible luck. Cortes formed alliances with indigenous peoples who hated Aztec rule, particularly the Tlaxcalans, who became his most important allies. He exploited divisions within the empire, played political factions against each other, and used superior military technology where he could. The conquest was not a simple story of Spanish bravery overcoming Aztec forces. It was a complex web of indigenous civil war, epidemic disease, strategic brilliance, and moments of horrifying violence on both sides. The fall of Tenochtitlan came after a lengthy siege that reduced the magnificent city to rubble. Thousands died of starvation and disease. The causeways were choked with bodies. By 1521, the Aztec Empire had fallen. Cortes stood victorious in a conquest that should never have succeeded based on pure military numbers. The sinking of the ships became legend. It became metaphor. It became the ultimate symbol of commitment, retold in 1,000 different contexts, simplified and dramatized until the historical Cortes was barely recognizable beneath the myth. But here's what's interesting. Cortes wasn't the first to make this choice. He wasn't even close. The tactic is far older than the conquest of Mexico. It stretches back through the centuries, through countless cultures and countless shores. The ancient Carthaginian general Agathocles reportedly burned his ships when invading North Africa in the 4th century before Christ. Julius Caesar destroyed bridges behind his army to force commitment. Chinese generals eliminated escape routes to inspire their troops. And perhaps nowhere is this tactic more resonant, more deeply embedded in cultural memory than in the cold, hard world of the medieval North, among the Vikings. The Northern Way. To understand why the image of burning boats resonates so deeply with Viking history, you first have to understand what ships meant to Norse culture. They weren't just transportation. They weren't merely tools. They were identity. They were status. They were the physical manifestation of everything that made the Vikings who they were. The Vikings called themselves seafarers before they called themselves anything else. The ocean was their highway, their escape route, their connection to the wider world. While much of medieval Europe saw the sea as a barrier, a vast and terrifying unknown filled with monsters and chaos, the Norse saw it as possibility. The Whale Road, they called it in their poetry, a path that went everywhere and nowhere, that could carry you to riches or to your death with equal ease. This relationship with the sea shaped everything about Norse society. Their religion featured gods who traveled by ship. Their afterlife was sometimes imagined as a voyage across dark waters to unknown shores. Their legal system, their social hierarchies, even their concept of kingship, all reflected the maritime nature of their culture. A Viking ship was a masterpiece of engineering, a thing of beauty and menace in equal measure. The classic long ship, the Drakkar with its dragon-headed prow, could navigate both open ocean and shallow rivers. It could beach on any shore, allow its crew to raid and pillage, then slip back into the water before defenders could organize a response. It was fast, maneuverable, and terrifying to behold. The design was revolutionary for its time. The clinker-built hull, with overlapping planks riveted together, was both flexible and strong. It could twist and flex with the waves rather than fighting against them, which made it more seaworthy than the rigid hulls favored in southern Europe. The shallow draft meant it could navigate rivers and coastal waters that larger ships couldn't reach. The single square sail was deceptively simple but remarkably efficient. Made from wool woven in a specific pattern, treated with animal fat and sometimes colored with expensive dyes, a good sail represented months of work by skilled women. The mast could be lowered when rowing or when the wind was unfavorable, and the whole rigging system could be disassembled and stored. When there was no wind or when navigating narrow waterways, the crew rowed. The oars weren't the crude paddles you might imagine, but carefully shaped tools, each one matched to the specific position in the ship where it would be used. The oarsmen sat on sea chests that contained their personal belongings, serving double duty as storage and seating. Building a longship required enormous resources. 14 large oak trees at minimum, each at least 3 feet in diameter. The trees had to be selected carefully and felled in specific ways to preserve the natural curve of the wood. A skilled shipwright could look at a growing tree and visualize which part of which plank would come from its trunk. Months of labor from skilled craftsmen followed. The keel was laid first, the spine of the ship, cut from a single massive oak if possible. Then the strakes, the long planks that formed the hull, were shaped and fitted with incredible precision. Each strake overlapped the one below it, creating that distinctive clinker-built look. They were fastened with iron rivets, hundreds of them, each one forged by hand. Iron rivets by the hundreds were needed. Pine tar for waterproofing, made by slow-burning pine wood in covered pits until it released its resin. Animal hair for caulking, packed into the seams between planks. Cordage made from plant fibers or animal hide. The knowledge of shipwrights passed down through generations, refined and perfected over centuries. A single longship represented a fortune in materials and man-hours. For a free farmer, building even a small boat might require years of saving and trading to gather the resources. A true warship, capable of carrying 50 or more warriors across the North Sea, was beyond the reach of anyone but the wealthy elite. More than that, it represented status. Only the wealthy could afford to build ships. Only the powerful could command them. To own a ship was to own possibility itself. To own a fleet was to be a lord, a jarl, someone who mattered in the Norse world. Your ship was your calling card, your resume, your proof of worth. The size and quality of your ship told everyone who saw it exactly where you stood in society. A small fishing boat marked you as a common man, making your living from the sea. A trading there showed you had resources to invest in commerce. A sleek warship proclaimed you a warrior, someone who could afford to take risks, who had crew members willing to follow you into danger. And when a great man died, what did they do? They buried him in his ship, or on his ship. They laid him out with his weapons and his treasures, with horses and dogs and all the things he would need in the afterlife. Sometimes they built a chamber within the ship's hull, a small room where the body rested surrounded by grave goods. Sometimes they simply laid the body in the open, visible to the sky one last time before the mound was built over it. And sometimes, though not as often as Hollywood would have you believe, they set it all on fire. The body, the treasures, the ship itself, all consumed in flames that were meant to carry the dead person's spirit to whatever came next. The image is seared into our cultural memory, a burning ship drifting out to sea, carrying a fallen warrior to Valhalla. But the reality was different and in some ways more interesting. Most ship burials didn't involve fire at all. The ship was simply buried, covered with earth, preserved in the soil. These buried ships have given us most of what we know about Viking shipbuilding, because the acidic soil of Scandinavia preserved the wood for 1,000 years or more. When fire was used, it wasn't a ship pushed out to sea. That's pure fiction, impossible practically speaking. A ship full of dry wood and grave goods would sink long before it burned completely. The fire would consume the upper works, but the hull would fill with water and founder. Instead, if fire was used, the ship was kept on land. A pyre was built, the ship was placed on or in it, and everything was burned together in one massive conflagration. This wasn't casual destruction. This was the ultimate honor. This was saying that this man, this warrior, this leader was so important that an entire ship, that fortune of oak and iron and labor, would be destroyed just to send him properly into the next world. The destruction itself was a form of wealth display, a final statement about the dead person's status and the generosity of their heirs. So when we talk about burning ships in a Viking context, we're not talking about matches and kindling. We're talking about destroying something sacred, something that represented power, wealth, identity, and the very means of Viking expansion. Something that families had invested in, that crews had trusted with their lives, the communities had watched being built over months or years. Now imagine being a Viking warrior, standing on a foreign shore. Maybe it's England, coast marked by white cliffs and the smell of strange vegetation. Maybe it's Ireland, where the rain never seems to stop and the locals speak in liquid syllables. Maybe it's some coast you can't even name, where the people speak a language that sounds like water over stones and look at you with a mixture of fear and hatred you've learned to recognize. Your ship brought you here. Your ship is your lifeline. Your ship is everything between you and a death on foreign soil. Your body left to rot without proper burial. Your spirit wandering lost because no one performed the right rites. You've sailed for days or weeks to reach this place. You've endured storms that made the ship creak and flex in ways that turned your stomach. You've pulled on the oars until your hands bled and your back felt broken. You've huddled under cloaks when the rain came horizontal, soaking through everything, chilling you to the bone even in summer. And now you're here, and your Jarl, your leader, the man you've sworn to follow, the man whose luck you've trusted with your life, gives the order. Burn it. The weight of wood. Let's pause for a moment and really consider what a Viking ship meant. Not in abstract terms, not as a symbol, but as a physical object that required constant care, constant maintenance, constant worry. You didn't just build a ship and sail away forever. Wood rots, caulking fails, rivets work loose in heavy seas. A ship was a living thing in its way, always demanding attention, always requiring repairs. The tar that sealed the planks needed constant renewal. The ropes that held everything together stretched and frayed. The sail, woven from wool, had to be treated and retreated to keep it from mildewing. Every voyage was a gamble, not just with enemy forces or unexpected storms, but with the ship itself. Would it hold together? Would the planks stay sealed? Would the mast snap in high winds? These weren't idle questions. They were matters of life and death, and the crew knew this intimately. Every man aboard had probably helped with repairs at some point, had felt the give of a loose strake, had noticed the smell of rot starting in a frame. They knew exactly how fragile their vessel was, how much stood between them and the cold depths. This knowledge made the ship precious in a way that's hard to explain to modern minds. It wasn't like a car that you can replace. It wasn't even like a house. It was more like a trusted warhorse, a companion animal, a thing that had carried you through danger and could do so again if you cared for it properly. Viking ships even had names. Not just designations, but names with character and meaning. Serpent, Sea Steed, Wave Walker, Dragon. These weren't assigned randomly. They reflected the personality of the ship, the way it handled, the spirit it seemed to embody. Some ships were lucky. Some seemed cursed. Sailors knew which was which. They could feel it in the way a vessel rode the waves, and how it responded to the steering oar, and the subtle creaks and groans it made in different seas. A good ship felt alive beneath your feet. A bad ship felt like it was waiting to betray you. So when we talk about burning ships, we're talking about killing something that men had labored over, invested in, trusted with their lives. Something that had personality and history and value beyond mere wood and iron. The Vikings understood this better than almost anyone. Their ship burials weren't just about putting a body in a boat. They were about honoring that bond between warrior and vessel, about recognizing that a man and his ship were, in some essential way, partners in the great adventure of life. Archaeological evidence shows us exactly how seriously they took this. At Oseberg in Norway, archaeologists found a ship burial that took their breath away. Two women, probably of high status, laid to rest in a beautifully preserved vessel. But it wasn't just the ship and the bodies. It was everything else. A cart, sleighs, textiles woven with incredible skill, kitchen equipment, farm tools, the remains of horses, oxen, dogs, everything these women might need. Everything that represented their life and status, all placed carefully in and around the ship. And this wasn't unusual. This was expected. This was proper. The Gokstad ship, another Norwegian find, held a warrior. The wounds on his skeleton told a story of a violent life and probably a violent death. He was surrounded by weapons, by fine clothing, by the trappings of his rank. And at the heart of it all, the ship itself, over 78 feet long, perfectly preserved in the clay soil, a testament to the care and skill that went into its construction. These ships weren't thrown away. They weren't abandoned. They were treasured, even in death, which makes the idea of burning one in life even more striking, because it happened. Not often, but it happened. When the ships actually burned, there's a persistent legend that Vikings would burn their ships when they invaded new lands, eliminating the possibility of retreat and forcing themselves to conquer or die. It's a stirring image. It fits perfectly with our modern notion of Viking berserkers, of warriors so committed to battle that they didn't even bring a backup plan. The reality is more complicated. Historical evidence suggests that Vikings very rarely burned their own ships as an invasion tactic. It happened, but not for the reasons modern motivational speakers might suggest. When Vikings did burn ships, it was usually for very specific reasons. Funerals, as we've discussed. That was the main reason. Not every funeral, not even most funerals, but for the wealthy and powerful, ship burial was the ultimate send-off. And sometimes that involved fire. The process wasn't like in the movies. They didn't push a burning longship out to sea and watch it drift into the sunset. That's pure Hollywood. What they did was build a pyre on land, place the ship on it or in it, arrange the body and the grave goods, and then set the whole thing ablaze. The heat was intense enough to consume wood, cloth, flesh. What remained was burned bone and melted metal, all mixed together in a layer of ash and charcoal. Sometimes they buried this burned material. Sometimes they scattered it. Sometimes they left it where it fell, marking the spot with stones or a mound. The point wasn't the specific ritual. The point was the transformation. Fire took something physical, something of this world, and changed it into something else. Smoke that rose to the sky, ash that blended with the earth. It was a boundary crossing, a way of sending someone from this life to whatever came next. But what about as a military tactic? What about standing on a beach in England or Ireland and deliberately destroying your means of escape? It probably happened, occasionally, but the evidence is thin and often unreliable. There's a reference in some later sources to Vikings burning their boats when they invaded Flamborough in England, supposedly to show their commitment to staying and conquering. But this comes from much later accounts, written long after the events, often with an agenda to portray Vikings as either terrifyingly committed warriors or as reckless barbarians, depending on who was doing the writing. The practical reality is that Vikings were, above all else, practical. They were raiders, traders, explorers. They understood logistics and supply lines and the importance of mobility. Burning your ships might make a dramatic statement, but it also left you stranded. If you won your battle but lost half your men, how did you get the survivors home? If you conquered a territory, but then were pushed out by a counterattack, how did you escape? The Vikings who settled in England, Ireland, Iceland, and beyond didn't do so by burning their ships behind them. They did it by establishing fortified camps, by building alliances with local populations, by setting up trade networks, by bringing families and livestock and everything needed for a new life. Ships weren't destroyed. They were used to ferry people and goods back and forth. They were kept in good repair because you never knew when you might need to leave in a hurry. But here's what's interesting. The legend persists for a reason. The image of burning ships resonates because it captures something true about the Viking mindset, even if the literal act was rare. Vikings did commit, absolutely. When they raided, they didn't hold back. When they fought to win. When they settled, they dug in and made it work. The commitment was real, even if the burning of ships was mostly symbolic or ceremonial. The psychology of no return. There's a reason the story of burning boats has such power. It speaks to something deep in human psychology, something about how we make decisions and how we commit to difficult paths. Psychologists call it commitment strategy. The basic idea is that sometimes the best way to achieve a difficult goal is to make it impossible to quit. You remove the escape routes. You eliminate the safety nets. You force yourself into a position where the only way out is through. In modern terms, it's like the writer who announces publicly that they're working on a novel. Now they can't quit quietly. Now failure will be public. Or the person trying to quit smoking who tells all their friends and family. Now there's social pressure to succeed. Now backing out means disappointing people. Burning the boats is the ultimate version of this. It's not just removing the easy option. It's removing all options except success or death. And it works. At least sometimes. Because humans are remarkably adaptable when we have no choice. When retreat is impossible, we find resources we didn't know we had. We become more creative, more determined, more willing to endure discomfort and risk. But there's a darker side too. Because what happens when you've burned the boats and you still can't win? What happens when commitment isn't enough? What happens when the Aztecs are stronger than you thought? Or the English shores are better defended than you expected? Or the weather turns against you? Then you die. Or you're captured. Or you're scattered and hunted. The same commitment that made you brave now makes you desperate. The same certainty that drove you forward now traps you in an unwinnable situation. This is the hidden cost of burning boats. It's not just a dramatic gesture. It's a gamble with lives at stake. It works brilliantly when you win. But when you lose, there's no consolation prize. There's no trying again next year. There's just the smoke of your burned ships drifting across a battlefield you'll never leave. The Vikings understood this. They understood it in their bones because they came from a culture where the line between life and death was always thin, where a bad harvest meant famine, where a feud could wipe out entire families, where the winter was long and dark and unforgiving. They didn't romanticize commitment the way we sometimes do. They knew what it cost. They knew that certainty was often just another word for stubbornness, and stubbornness could get you killed just as easily as it could win you glory. But they also knew that sometimes, you had to commit everything. You had to burn the boats, literally or figuratively, because half measures wouldn't work, because the goal was too important, because going home empty-handed was worse than not going home at all. The raid, let's imagine it, not as a legend, not as a story told around fire centuries later, but as it might have actually happened. A Viking raid on the coast of England, sometime in the 9th century. The year doesn't matter. The specific place doesn't matter. What matters is the experience, the reality of what it meant to be there. You're a young warrior, maybe 19 or 20. You've been training with weapons since you were old enough to hold a stick. You've practiced with shield and axe, learned to row in sync with others, studied the techniques of fighting in a shield wall. This is your third raid across the North Sea. You've been to these foreign shores before. You've seen combat. You've survived. You're not a veteran yet, seasoned and scarred, but you're no longer completely green. The first raid you went on 2 years ago, you were terrified. You barely slept the entire voyage, convinced the ship would founder, that sea monsters would pull you down into the depths, that you'd never see your family again. When the fighting started, you froze for a crucial moment. Your shield mate had to cover you until you remembered your training and started moving again. The second raid went better. You kept your head. You stayed in formation. You even managed to strike a few blows that landed, though whether you actually killed anyone is unclear in the chaos of battle. You came home with a small share of silver and a lot of relief that you'd survived again. Now it's your third raid, and you feel different, more confident, maybe even a little excited. The terror is still there, a constant background hum, but you've learned to function despite it. You know what to expect. You know you can do this. Your Jarl, the man who leads your warband, is named Ragnar. Not that Ragnar, not the legendary one from the sagas. Just a man named Ragnar, which was common enough in the Norse world. He's maybe 40 years old, graying at the temples, with scars on his forearms, and a reputation for being both lucky and shrewd. Men follow him not because he's the fiercest warrior, though he can hold his own, but because he brings them home alive and usually richer than when they left. Ragnar owns 3 ships, which makes him wealthy by the standards of your home valley. One is his pride, a longship that can carry 50 men. The other 2 are smaller, maybe 30 men each, but still seaworthy and fast. He loans out the 2 smaller ships to other men who lead their own crews, but they all answer to him on raids. It's a practical arrangement. Together, 3 ships can tackle targets that would be too dangerous for one. The crossing this time was rough. Late summer storms, unusual for the season, caught you halfway across. The ships were separated for a day and a night. When you finally regrouped, everyone was exhausted and one ship was missing. You never found out what happened to it. Maybe it made it to shore somewhere else. Maybe it foundered. The sea keeps its secrets. 2 men were lost overboard from your ship during the worst of the storm. You knew them both. Eric, who used to joke about everything, who could make people laugh even when they were cold and miserable. He went over during a particularly violent wave, simply vanished over the side before anyone could grab him. The sea took him so quickly, there wasn't even time to shout his name. The other was Bjorn, an older man, a veteran of a dozen raids. He was trying to secure a loose stay when the ship lurched and he lost his footing. He did shout once as he hit the water. You saw him surface, saw him try to swim toward the ship, but you were moving too fast and the waves were too high. He fell behind, his head disappearing and reappearing in the swells. getting smaller until you couldn't see him anymore. You didn't have time to mourn. Survival demanded immediate attention. Bailing water, keeping the sail trimmed, maintaining the rhythm of the oars when the wind failed. But later, huddled under your cloak trying to sleep while the ship still bucked and swayed, you thought about them. About how quickly it happened. About how easily it could have been you. By the time you make landfall on a rocky beach somewhere in Northumbria, everyone is exhausted, soaked to the bone, and irritable. The beach is unwelcoming, just gray sand and stones, with cliffs rising behind it and seabirds screaming overhead. The smell of land, earth, and vegetation, and smoke from distant fires is almost overwhelming after days of nothing but salt water. You help drag the ships up onto the sand. It's back-breaking work. Dozens of men pulling on ropes, others pushing from behind, trying to get the hulls high enough that the tide won't take them. Your feet sink into the wet sand with every step. Your shoulders burn from the effort, but it's necessary. The ships are your lives. Without them, you're stranded here forever. Finally, after what feels like hours, all 3 ships are secured. Someone starts a fire with driftwood, nursing the flames carefully because everything's damp. Someone else begins distributing dried fish and hard bread from the supplies. The food is barely edible after the crossing. The bread is more mold than grain. The fish is so salt-crusted it makes your mouth pucker. But it's calories, and calories mean you can keep going. The mood should be celebratory. You're close to the target, a monastery the traders have spoken about, wealthy with silver and gold and books bound in precious metals. The monks have no weapons, no training, no way to defend themselves. It should be easy. Just march in, take what you want, and get back to the ships before anyone can organize a response. But the mood is subdued instead. People are exhausted. The storm took something out of everyone, some vital energy that hasn't returned yet. Men sit by the fire in small groups, speaking quietly or not at all. The absence of Eric and Bourne is felt. Empty spaces where they should be sitting, where their voices should be joining the conversation. Then Ragnar speaks. He's been standing apart, speaking with the leaders of the other 2 crews, looking inland toward the smoke of distant settlements. Now he raises his voice so everyone can hear. It's not loud. He doesn't shout, but it carries across the beach. He says that scouts have seen English soldiers inland. Not many, maybe 50 or 60, but mounted on horses. They'll have seen your ships from the cliffs. They'll know you're here. They'll be gathering reinforcements, sending riders to summon more men. By tomorrow, maybe the day after, there could be hundreds of them, maybe 1,000, maybe more. The monastery you're targeting is a day's march inland. You'll need to get there, loot it thoroughly enough to make the voyage worthwhile, and get back to the ships before those soldiers arrive. The mathematics are tight, very tight. 1 day to march in, 1 day at the monastery, 1 day to march back. 3 days total. If the English can gather their forces faster than that, you'll be caught between them and the sea. Someone suggests just leaving, taking the ships north or south along the coast, finding an easier target, somewhere that doesn't have cavalry waiting inland. It's a reasonable suggestion, prudent, safe. No one would call you cowards for choosing to fight another day. But Ragnar shakes his head slowly. You can see him thinking, weighing options. Finally, he explains, they're committed now. The English know they're here. If they leave now and try to raid somewhere else along this coast, those mounted soldiers will track them. They'll send warning ahead. Every target will be prepared, defended, waiting. The element of surprise, which is the Viking raiders' greatest advantage, is gone. Better to hit the target they came for. Hit it hard and fast. Take what they can and leave before the English can mount an effective response. At least then the voyage will have been worthwhile. At least they'll have something to show for the risk, for the men lost in the crossing, for the weeks away from home. Then he says something that makes everyone stop moving, stop eating, stop whatever they were doing. His voice is still quiet, but there's steel in it now. He says you're going to burn one of the ships. For a moment, No one reacts. You're not sure you heard correctly. Burn a ship? One of the 3 ships you have left after losing one in the storm. Burn one of your few means of getting home? Ragnar continues before anyone can protest. Not all the ships, he says. That would be madness, suicide. But one, the smallest one, the one that was already taking on water during the storm, the one that would slow everyone down on the journey home anyway, that would require constant bailing, that might founder in another storm. You're going to burn it, right here on the beach, in full view of anyone watching from inland. You're going to send a message, not to yourselves, though that's part of it, but to the English. You're going to tell them that you're not raiders who hit and run like thieves in the night. You're warriors who came here to take what you want and who aren't planning to leave quickly. More importantly, Ragnar explains, you're sending a message to your own men. There are only 2 ships now instead of 3. That means less capacity for treasure. Yes, but also less capacity for men. That means everyone needs to pull their weight. That means if things go wrong, if you take casualties, some men might have to stay behind. Not because anyone wants to abandon them, but because there simply won't be room. The mathematics of it are brutal. 3 ships could carry everyone with room to spare. 2 ships leave no margin for error. If you lose 20 or 30 men in the fighting, the survivors will all fit, barely. If you lose more than that, choices will have to be made. Who stays and who goes? By burning 1 ship now, Ragnar is making everyone more committed to the success of the raid. Because the margin for error just got a lot smaller. Because individual survival is now directly tied to the group's success. You can't afford heavy casualties. You can't afford to get pinned down in a prolonged fight. You need to move fast, hit hard, and get out before the English can bring their numbers to bear. Is it smart strategy? Maybe, maybe not. You're not experienced enough to judge. But it's done. Even as Ragnar is still explaining, men are already moving to obey. The smallest ship is being dragged higher up the beach, away from the tide line. Men are piling dry driftwood around it. Branches and old timber scavenged from further along the shore. You watch, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. That ship carried you safely across the North Sea. Not on this voyage, but on the first one 2 years ago. You remember rowing in it, the particular rhythm of that crew, the way the ship handled in different seas. You remember sheltering under its overturned hull once during a rainstorm on a beach in Ireland, listening to the water drum on the wood while you dried your clothes and ate cold fish. Now it's going to burn. A ship that's crossed the North Sea dozens of times, that survives storms and battles, that represents months of labor by skilled craftsmen, is going to be destroyed. Not because it's broken beyond repair, but because destroying it serves a purpose. Because the psychological impact is worth more than the ship's continued existence. Someone has a torch now, flames flickering in the evening breeze. Ragnar takes it himself. He says a few words that you can't quite hear, maybe a prayer to the gods, maybe just a farewell to a faithful vessel. Then he touches the torch to the driftwood. The wood is damp from sea spray, so it smokes terribly at first. Thick black plumes that sting your eyes and make you cough. That smell of salt and burning. But then it catches properly, finds dry wood deeper in the pile, and the flames begin to climb. They race along the hull, consuming the tar that seals the planks. They climb the mast, which still stands, eating their way up toward the sky. They find the sail, which someone forgot to remove, and it goes up in a sudden whoosh of flame that makes everyone step back from the heat. The fire is intense even from a distance. You have to shield your face with your hand. The heat seems to press against you physically, pushing you back. The smoke rises in a great pillar, visible for miles. Anyone watching from the cliffs or from the villages inland will see it, will know exactly where you are, will understand that you're here and not trying to hide it. And as you watch, you realize something profound. You came here on that ship. You trusted it with your life, crossing one of the most dangerous seas in the world. And now it's gone. There's no taking it back. There's no changing the plan. There's no second-guessing Ragnar's decision. You're committed now, fully and completely. The number of ships has decreased. The number of seats for the return voyage has decreased. Your individual survival is now tied even more tightly to the success of the raid, to everyone pulling together, to no one breaking ranks or losing their nerve. The ship burns through the night. Long after everyone else has turned away, has wrapped themselves in cloaks and tried to sleep, you can still see the glow. The flames gradually die down, but the embers remain hot for hours. In the morning, when you wake cold and stiff, the first thing you see is what's left. Just a blackened skeleton, the ribs of the ship poking up from a pile of ash and charred planks. The mast has fallen, collapsed into the hull. The dragonhead prow, which survived the flames for some reason, lies to one side, blackened but still recognizable, still fierce in its own way. You leave it there on the beach as you begin your march inland. No one says much. Everyone is focused now. There's no more talk of leaving, of finding easier targets. The path is set. You march, you raid, you load the remaining ships with silver and gold and anything else you can carry. And then you sail home. Or you don't. But either way, there's no halfway anymore. No hesitation, no second guessing. You're committed now in a way that goes beyond words, beyond oaths. The burned ship has made it real, made it unavoidable. Tomorrow you'll reach the monastery. Tomorrow you'll find out if Radmar's gamble pays off. Tomorrow you'll discover whether burning that ship was brilliant strategy or fatal foolishness. But tonight, as you try to sleep on cold ground with your weapons close at hand, you're not thinking about tomorrow. You're thinking about that ship, about the flames, about the finality of it, about the fact that some decisions can't be undone and some paths have no branches leading back the way you came. You're thinking about commitment, about certainty, about what it means to truly burn your boats and accept the consequences, whatever they may be. The weight of certainty, the thing about certainty, is that it's heavy. Heavier than doubt in its way, because doubt leaves room for adjustment, for changing your mind, for graceful retreat. Certainty closes doors. It narrows paths. It removes options. When Court scuttled his ships, he wasn't just demonstrating confidence in eventual victory. He was placing an enormous weight on his men. The weight of knowing that failure now meant death, that there was no halfway. No, we tried our best. Just win or die. Some of his men must have hated him for it, must have looked at the sinking ships and felt not inspiration, but rage. Who was he to make that choice for them? Who was he to gamble with their lives so completely? But others probably felt relief. The uncertainty was gone. The possibility of retreat, which had been a distraction, a whisper in the back of the mind, was eliminated. Now there was only forward, only the mission. It simplified everything in its way. This is the strange duality of burning boats. It's both crushing and liberating. It removes your safety net, yes, but it also removes the mental burden of constantly recalculating whether to continue or retreat. Now there's only one path, and sometimes, often even, that clarity is powerful. Vikings lived with this kind of certainty more than most medieval peoples. Their whole society was built around accepting risk, committing to voyages into the unknown, trusting in fate and luck and skill in roughly equal measure. They had a concept called word, which is often translated as fate but is more complex than that. It was the idea that certain things were woven into the pattern of your life, that some outcomes were determined by forces beyond your control. But unlike the Greek idea of fate, which was absolute, word was more like a current. You could swim with it or against it, but you couldn't escape it entirely. So when a Viking warrior committed to a raid, to a voyage, to a battle, he was aligning himself with his word. He was saying, "This is my path. This is what's woven for me." And once that commitment was made, there was a certain peace in accepting it. The boat is burned. The path is set. What will be, will be. This isn't the same as recklessness. Vikings weren't suicidal. They calculated odds as well as anyone. But once they committed fully. There was no holding back 20% just in case. You gave everything because anything less was dishonor. And honor, in the Viking world, was worth more than life. A man who lived but broke his word was worth less than a man who died keeping it. A warrior who ran from battle might survive, but he would carry that shame until he died. Better to fall fighting than to live in disgrace. This is why the image of burning boats resonates so strongly with Viking culture, even if the literal act was rare. Because symbolically, Vikings were always burning boats. They were always making irreversible commitments. Every voyage to a distant land, every raid on a defended shore, every battle against superior numbers, it was all a form of burning boats. They couldn't take it back. They couldn't undo it. They could only move forward and hope that courage and skill and luck would see them through. The forgotten ships, but let's talk about the ships that didn't burn. The ones that waited patiently on beaches, swaying in tide pools, while their crews raided inland. The ones that carried Vikings home after successful raids and unsuccessful ones. The ones that were repaired and repaired again, sailed season after season, until they finally wore out and were broken up for timber. These ships don't get legends. They don't inspire motivational speeches, but they're the majority. They're the reality of Viking expansion. Because for every dramatic burning, there were hundreds of careful, practical decisions. Vikings who protected their ships like the precious resources they were, who posted guards, who beached them in defensible positions, who chose targets based partly on how easy it would be to get back to their vessels if things went wrong. The great heathen army that invaded England in 865 didn't burn their ships. They pulled them up rivers, used them as supply lines, moved them strategically to support different campaigns. When they finally settled and became the Danelaw, those ships were used for trade, for fishing, for maintaining connections back to Scandinavia. The Vikings who colonized Iceland didn't burn their ships behind them. They used them to shuttle back and forth, bringing more settlers, more livestock, more supplies. The ships were the lifeline that made settlement possible. Even in warfare, smart Viking commanders knew better than to destroy their own mobility. Ships weren't just a way home. They were a tactical advantage. You could strike from unexpected directions. You could retreat and regroup. You could move along coastlines faster than any army on land. Burning your ships was, in most cases, stupid, tactically unsound, a waste of resources, which is probably why it happened so rarely. But the legend persists because we want it to be true. We want to believe that great achievements require great sacrifices, that you have to burn the boats to prove you're serious. That commitment must be total and irreversible to be real. And maybe sometimes that's true. Maybe Courts really did need to scuttle those ships to unite his men and push forward. Maybe there are moments in history when the dramatic gesture is also the smart move. But more often, the truth is less romantic. More often, success comes from careful planning, from preserving options, from knowing when to retreat and when to advance, from protecting your ships so you can sail again another day. The Vikings knew this. They were romantics in their way, with their poetry and their gods and their dreams of Valhalla. But they were also practical people who understood that you can't raid successfully if you're stranded on a foreign shore with no way home. So they kept their ships. They maintained them. They treasured them. And when they did burn them, when they sent them up in flames with the bodies of the honored dead, it meant something precisely because it was rare. Precisely because everyone knew what was being sacrificed. The morning after, imagine you're that same young Viking warrior, standing on a Northumbrian beach at dawn. The burned ship is still smoldering, sending up thin wisps of smoke that the wind tears apart and scatters. Your muscles are sore from yesterday's march. Your feet are blistered. You're hungry and cold and not entirely sure this was a good idea. The raid went well enough. The monastery had less gold than expected, but enough to make it worthwhile. A few monks were killed in the initial rush, before your Jarl called for restraint. The rest were bound and left in the chapel while you ransacked everything else. Crosses, candlesticks, illuminated manuscripts, coins, all piled into sacks and loaded onto the backs of those who weren't carrying weapons. But then on the way back, you ran into English soldiers. Not the main force, just an advance scouting party, maybe 20 men. Still, there was a fight. You lost 3 warriors. One of them was your cousin. You helped carry his body back to the beach, and now you're trying not to think about how you're going to tell his mother. The remaining ships are being loaded. There's more treasure than expected, which is good, but there are also fewer men, which is bad. The math works out to more shares for each survivor, but that's cold comfort when you're looking at empty spaces where friends used to stand. And all of this entire raid, was done in the shadow of that burned ship. The one that's now just charred wood and ash. The one that made retreat just a little bit harder, made the stakes just a little bit higher. Was it worth it? Did burning that ship make the difference between success and failure? Or was it just a gesture, a bit of theater that changed nothing except the number of ships you had available? You'll never know for certain. But you do know this. When that ship was burning, when you watched the flames climb the mast and consume everything, you felt something shift inside you. A hardening maybe, a commitment, a willingness to push further than you might have otherwise. So maybe it worked. Not in any measurable way. Not in any way you could explain to someone who wasn't there. But in the space between certainty and doubt, between courage and fear, maybe burning that ship tipped the balance just enough. Or maybe you're just telling yourself that because the alternative is admitting that your y'all made a foolish, dramatic choice that risked lives for no good reason. Either way, the ship is burned. The raid is over. The treasure is loaded. And now you sail home with 3 fewer men than you started with and 1 fewer ship. The water is cold and gray. The wind is picking up from the north. You lean into your oar and pull, pull, pull. Behind you, the coast of England fades into mist. Ahead is the long crossing, the days of rowing and sailing, the hope that the weather holds and the ships don't founder and you make it back to see your family again. You try not to think about the burned ship, but the smell of smoke is still in your clothes. The image of those flames is still bright behind your eyes. And something has changed in you, though you couldn't say exactly what. All you know is that you crossed a line back there. You committed to something in a way you never had before. And whether that makes you braver or just more reckless, you're not entirely sure. The other conquistador's course wasn't the only one, of course. The tactic of destroying ships or boats to ensure commitment shows up repeatedly throughout history, long before the Spanish conquest of Mexico. Alexander the Great, for instance. When he crossed into Persia, legend says he ordered his men to burn their boats. The message was the same. We're not going back. We either conquer this empire or we die trying. There's no middle ground. Whether Alexander actually did this is debatable. Ancient historians loved a good story, and the image of burning boats is too perfect, too symbolic, not to include whether it happened or not. But the story persisted because it fit Alexander's character, his ambition, his absolute commitment to conquest. Then there's Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon. He didn't burn boats, but he might as well have. The Rubicon was a river that marked the boundary of Italy. Roman law forbade a general from crossing it with his army. To do so was treason, pure and simple. There was no taking it back, no saying just kidding once you crossed. Caesar knew this. His men knew this. When he gave the order to cross, he was burning his boats in a very real sense. He was committing to civil war, to overthrowing the republic, to becoming either a dictator or a corpse. There was no path that led to a quiet retirement in the countryside. The die is cast, he supposedly said. Another way of saying the boats are burned. The choice is made. Now we live with the consequences. Medieval history is full of these moments. Not always involving literal ships or boats, but always involving that same fundamental choice. The point of no return. The moment when you commit absolutely, when you remove the possibility of retreat, when you say this is my path and I will walk it to the end. whatever that end may be. Knights taking the cross to go on crusade. They burned their boats in a metaphorical sense. They swore oaths that bound them to a journey of years, to battles against enemies they'd never seen, in lands they'd never imagined. Some never came back. Those who did were often changed beyond recognition. Monks entering monasteries, taking vows of poverty, chastity, obedience. They were burning boats too, giving up family, property, freedom, committing to a life that offered spiritual rewards but demanded everything worldly in return. Peasants joining the Children's Crusade or following religious prophets into the wilderness. They burned their boats when they left their villages, abandoned their plots of land, walked away from the only life they'd ever known. Most died. Some found something they couldn't have found at home. All crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. This is what burning boats really means. Not the literal flames, not the specific act of destroying ships, but the moment of commitment. The choice to move forward when moving back is no longer possible. And medieval history, perhaps more than any other era, is defined by these moments, by oaths that bound you for life, by feudal obligations that passed from father to son, by religious vows that were considered more binding than chains, by the constant pressure to commit absolutely, to declare yourself, to take a side and stick with it no matter the cost. There was very little room for middle ground in the medieval world. You were Christian or heathen, noble or common, free or enslaved, loyal or traitor. The categories were stark and the boundaries hard. So burning boats, whether literal or metaphorical, was simply how life worked. You made choices that you couldn't undo. You took paths that led places you couldn't return from. And you learned to live with the consequences. The unburned path. But let's consider the alternative. The ship that doesn't burn. The boat that waits patiently on the shore. The possibility of retreat that remains open. Is that cowardice? Is that a failure of commitment? Or is it simple prudence? The basic wisdom of not destroying resources you might desperately need. The Vikings who became successful traders didn't burn their ships. They maintained them carefully, used them season after season, passed them down through families. These ships enabled commerce that enriched whole communities, that brought goods and ideas from distant lands, that built connections between cultures. The Norse who settled Iceland, Greenland, even briefly Newfoundland, they didn't burn their ships either. They used them as lifelines back to their homeland. When supplies ran low, they could sail back for more. When the settlements struggled, people could leave. This flexibility, this keeping of options open, actually enabled the colonization to succeed. Even in warfare, the most successful campaigns were often those that preserved the possibility of retreat. An army that can withdraw, regroup, and attack again is more dangerous than one that commits everything to a single battle. Strategic flexibility wins more wars than dramatic gestures. So maybe the real wisdom isn't in burning boats, but in knowing when to burn them and when to keep them safe. In understanding that commitment is important, but so is adaptability. That certainty has its place, but so does doubt. The Vikings, for all their reputation as berserkers and death seekers, actually understood this quite well. They were traders as much as raiders, farmers as much as warriors. They valued their ships too much to destroy them lightly. When they did burn them, it meant something. It was a choice, not a reflex. Compare this to Cortes, whose burned ships become the defining story of his conquest. The Spaniards won, yes, but they won at enormous cost. Thousands of indigenous allies died fighting for them. Thousands more died from diseases the Spanish brought. The Aztec Empire fell, but what rose in its place was built on bones. Would things have been different if Cortes had kept his ships? Probably not. The conquest would have happened anyway, driven by Spanish ambition and Aztec vulnerability. But maybe his men would have felt less trapped. Maybe they would have fought with less desperation. Maybe some outcomes would have been less brutal. Or maybe not. Maybe that desperation, the trapped feeling, that absolute commitment born of having no way back, maybe that was exactly what pushed them to victory. Maybe Kortz understood his men better than they understood themselves. Maybe he knew they needed that dramatic gesture to fully commit. History doesn't give us control groups. We can't run the experiment both ways and see which works better. We only get the story that happened, and in that story, the boats burned. But we can still ask the question, what would we have done? If we'd been on that beach in Mexico, watching our ships being scuttled, watching our only escape route disappear, would we have felt inspired or terrified? Would we have fought harder or just resigned ourselves to death? And maybe the answer is both. Maybe you'd feel both things at once: inspiration and terror, commitment and despair, certainty and doubt, all tangled together in a knot you couldn't untie. Maybe that's what burning boats really does. Not eliminate fear, but intensify it. Not create certainty, but force you to act as if you're certain even when you're not. Not make you braver, but make retreat so unthinkable that you have no choice but to move forward. And maybe that's enough. The cost in blood. Let's be honest about what burning boats actually means. It sounds noble in retrospect when told as a legend, but in the moment, it's terrifying. And the cost is measured not in boats, but in lives. When Kortz scuttled his ships, he wasn't just making a symbolic gesture. He was condemning every man who failed in the conquest to death. No retreat meant no mercy. No way back meant no second chances. Some of those men died in battle. More died of disease. Still more died of exhaustion, starvation, infected wounds that might have been treatable if they'd had the option to retreat to their ships and sail home. Burning the boats didn't just inspire commitment. It raised the body count. The same was true for any Viking raid where ships were destroyed or left vulnerable. If you lost, if the English or Irish or Frankish defenders proved stronger than expected, you had nowhere to go. You stood and died. Or you tried to flee inland and were hunted down. Or you surrendered and spent the rest of your life in slavery. The burned boats meant there were only two outcomes: total victory or total defeat. Nothing in between. No honorable withdrawal. No living to fight another day. Just win or die. And yes, sometimes this worked. Sometimes that desperation, that backed into a corner fury, made the difference. Sometimes men fought with a ferocity they couldn't have mustered if they knew they had an escape route. But sometimes it just meant everyone died. There's a reason why most successful military commanders throughout history haven't burned their boats. Sun Tzu, writing in ancient China, specifically warned against cornering your enemy with no escape route, because desperate men fight with the fury of trapped animals. Better to leave them a path to flee, he argued, and they'll take it rather than fight to the death. The same logic applies to your own forces. If they know they can retreat if necessary, they'll fight more intelligently, more carefully. They'll take calculated risks instead of desperate ones. They'll preserve their strength for battles that matter instead of throwing themselves against impossible odds just because there's no alternative. Burning boats is, in this light, a failure of strategy. It's turning your army into cornered rats instead of disciplined soldiers. It might work if everything goes perfectly, but it leaves no room for the friction and chaos and random chance that define actual warfare. The Vikings understood this, which is again why they so rarely actually burned their ships. They valued mobility, flexibility, the ability to strike and fade away. They didn't want to be trapped on foreign shores with no way out. They wanted to control when and where they fought, and you can't do that if you destroyed your only means of escape. So the legends of burned boats should maybe come with a warning label. Yes, they're inspiring. Yes, they demonstrate commitment. But they also represent a kind of tactical foolishness that gets people killed. The real skill isn't in burning boats. It's in knowing when commitment is necessary and when flexibility is wiser. In understanding that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is preserve your options. Keep your ship safe and live to fight another day. The return home. Let's return to our imagined Viking warrior one last time. You've made it home. The crossing was rough, but manageable. You lost one more man to sickness, but the rest survived. The treasure was divided. Your share is good, better than you expected, enough to get through the winter comfortably. But something is different. You stand on the familiar shore of your village, and it feels strange. Smaller than you remembered, quieter. The faces of your family are the same, but you see them differently now, because you've crossed something. You've been to the edge and looked over. You've seen what happens when you burn the boats, when you commit absolutely, when you remove the possibility of retreat. And it changed you, not in dramatic ways. You don't have nightmares. You don't jump at shadows. You're not broken, but you're different. Harder, maybe. More certain of some things and less certain of others. You tell the story of the burned ship to anyone who asks, but you notice that you tell it differently each time. Sometimes it's heroic, a tale of absolute commitment that inspired everyone to fight harder. Sometimes it's practical, just a necessary decision to remove a liability. Sometimes you're not sure what it was. What you do know is this: you'd do it again. If your Jarl gave the same order on the next raid, you wouldn't question it. You'd help pile the driftwood around the hull. You'd watch it burn. You'd feel that same mixture of fear and determination, because that's what burning boats teaches you. Not that certainty is always right, or that commitment always leads to victory, but that sometimes you have to choose. You have to commit. You have to accept that some decisions can't be undone, and some paths have no branches leading back the way you came. And maybe that's the real lesson. Not burn your boats or keep them safe. Not commitment or flexibility, but knowing that both have their place. That life requires both the dramatic gesture and the careful preservation of options. That sometimes you burn the boats and sometimes you guard them with your life. And wisdom is knowing which situation you're in. The Vikings understood this in a way that our simplified, motivational poster version of their history misses. They weren't all berserkers charging into battle with no thought of survival. Most of them were farmers and traders and craftsmen who occasionally went raiding to supplement their income. They valued their ships, protected them, maintained them carefully. But when the moment came when it really mattered, they could commit absolutely. They could burn the boats, literally or metaphorically, and accept the consequences. That's the real Viking legacy. Not reckless abandon, but calculated risk. Not blind certainty, but clear-eyed acceptance of what commitment requires. And maybe that's what the phrase means: if you're so certain, burn all the boats. It's not a command. It's a test. Are you actually certain? Certain enough to bet everything? Certain enough to remove your safety net? Certain enough to accept that you might be wrong and still move forward anyway? Most of us, most of the time, aren't that certain, and that's okay. That's prudent. We keep our boats safe and sail them again when needed. But sometimes, rarely, we face a moment that requires that level of commitment. And in those moments, the legend of the burned boats reminds us what's possible when you truly commit. When you stop hedging your bets and planning your escape routes and just decide, this is my path. This is what I'm doing, and I will see it through to the end. The embers fade, the fire has burned down now. The logs in your imagination have collapsed into glowing coals. The story is ending, as stories do, not with trumpets or revelations, but with a slow fading into silence. We've traveled from the beaches of Mexico to the cold shores of medieval England. We've watched ships burn and heard the crackle of flames consuming oak and iron. We've stood with conquistadors and Vikings, with men making impossible choices on foreign shores. And what have we learned? Maybe that certainty is more complicated than it seems. That commitment has costs we don't always count. That burning boats is sometimes necessary and sometimes foolish and rarely as simple as the legends make it sound. Maybe that the Vikings, those medieval warriors we romanticize so thoroughly, understood nuance better than we give them credit for. They knew when to burn and when to preserve, when to commit absolutely and when to keep their options open. Maybe that history is always more complex than the stories we tell about it. That for every dramatic gesture, there are 100 practical decisions. That for every ship burned in glory, there are 1,000 carefully maintained and sailed season after season by people whose names we'll never know. Or maybe we've simply spent a few hours in the company of the past, letting its rhythms slow our breathing, its weight settle over us like a blanket. The shore is dark now. The embers are fading. The boats, burned or unburned, have long since crumbled to dust. But the question remains, floating there in the space between waking and sleep. If you were so certain, would you burn all the boats? Would you commit that absolutely? Risk that completely? Trust your judgment enough to destroy your way back? Most of us never have to answer that question. Most of us live our lives in the careful middle, preserving options, hedging bets, keeping boats in good repair just in case. And that's fine. That's how most people live, Viking and conquistador and everyone else. The burned boats are the exceptions, the legends, the stories we tell because they're dramatic, not because they're typical. But sometimes, in the quiet darkness, we wonder, what would we do? How certain would we need to be? What would it take to make us destroy our own escape route and stake everything on success? We don't need to answer. The question itself is enough. It's a measuring stick for our own commitments, our own certainties, our own willingness to risk. And as you drift off now, as sleep finally takes you, maybe you're standing on a beach somewhere. Maybe there's a ship nearby, waiting patiently. Maybe there's a torch in your hand. The question is simple, but the answer is yours alone. Would you light it? Would you watch the flames climb? Would you turn your back on the burning and march inland, knowing there's no way home except through whatever waits ahead? The Vikings would understand if you did, and they'd understand if you didn't, because they knew, better than most, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is keep your ships safe and sail them again when the time is right. Sleep now. The boats can wait until morning. The decision can wait until you're standing on an actual shore with an actual torch, if that moment ever comes. For now, just rest. Let the tide come in and out. Let the smoke drift away on the wind. Let the past settle back into the silence it came from. The boats are burning somewhere in some story on some distant shore. But here, now, in this moment, they're just wood and water and the memories of men who chose, one way or another, to commit or to preserve, to burn or to save. And that choice made all the difference. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe the boats were never really the point. Maybe the point was always just the act of choosing, of deciding, of standing at a crossroads and picking a path even when you weren't entirely sure where it led. The flames have faded now. The shore is quiet. Sleep well, traveler. Tomorrow's choices can wait for tomorrow. Tonight, just let the gentle rhythm of waves on a distant beach carry you away to wherever dreams of old warriors and burned ships might lead. The boats are burned, or they're not. The shore is behind you, or it's not. The path leads forward, or it doesn't. And for now, that's enough.